The 1840s are remembered as the decade when census data became unexpectedly precise across multiple nations. Population counts that had been estimates for centuries suddenly shifted to exact figures, standardized categories, and coordinated collection methods. But in 1841, the British census recorded 15,914,148 people. Not approximately 16 million. Not around 15.5 million. Exactly 15,914,148. This wasn't an isolated improvement. Within the same decade, census systems in the United States, Prussia, Belgium, and France adopted nearly identical methodologies. The collection intervals synchronized. The categories matched. The administrative frameworks appeared fully formed. The infrastructure required to execute this kind of precision didn't gradually develop. It arrived at scale. Before we go further, this is a documentary exploration of historical patterns, not a definitive claim about what they prove. The observations presented here are based on public records, infrastructure timelines, and architectural documentation. The goal is to examine what exists, not to conclude why it exists. The accepted explanation is straightforward. Industrial growth demanded better data. Governments needed to know population sizes for taxation, military planning, and resource allocation. As nations modernized, their administrative systems modernized with them. That explanation works until you look at what it required. In 1841, Britain conducted a single-day census across the entire country. Every household was counted within 24 hours. Enumerators were trained. Forms were standardized. Regional offices coordinated. Data was compiled into national reports within months. This wasn't just an improvement over previous methods. It was a structural leap. The 1831 census had been much simpler. Local officials estimated populations based on household counts. Categories were loose. Timing was flexible. There was no coordinated national effort. 10 years later, the system looked like it had been operating for decades. The same pattern appears in the United States. The 1840 census introduced age brackets, occupational categories, and questions about literacy and disability. Enumerators received printed instructions. The forms were uniform across all states. The methodology was consistent from Maine to Louisiana. The 1830 census had been basic. Households were counted. Free and enslaved populations were separated. That was the extent of the data. A decade later, the system had transformed. Prussia's 1840 census introduced individual-level data collection, not just household totals. Individual names, ages, and occupations. The administrative framework to manage this kind of detail appeared suddenly. Regional offices coordinated with local officials. Data flowed upward through hierarchical systems that hadn't existed a decade earlier. France's 1841 census adopted similar methods. Belgium followed in 1846. The systems weren't identical, but the underlying logic was. What makes this pattern notable isn't just that census methods improved. It's that they improved in parallel, across nations with different governments, languages, and administrative traditions. And they all improved in the same decade. The infrastructure required to execute this kind of coordination doesn't appear overnight. Census taking at this scale requires trained personnel, standardized forms, regional offices, communication networks, and data compilation systems. These are institutional capacities, not just policy decisions. In 1841, Britain employed over 35,000 enumerators. They were recruited, trained, and deployed within months. The logistical framework to manage that workforce existed before the census was announced. The organizational depth implied by that number raises questions about when the capacity was built. The United States faced even greater challenges. The 1840 census covered 17 million people spread across vast distances. Communication between regions was slow. Roads were inconsistent. Yet the census was executed with remarkable uniformity. The enumerators in Massachusetts used the same forms as enumerators in Georgia. The questions were identical. The timing was synchronized. This suggests a level of administrative reach that feels disproportionate to the government's other capacities at the time. Prussia's 1840 census required even more precision. Individual-level data meant enumerators had to visit every household and record detailed information. The logistics of managing that process across a population of over 30 million people are substantial. The administrative systems capable of executing that kind of operation don't develop in isolation. They require institutional memory, training programs, and hierarchical structures. And yet, those systems appeared in the 1840s without visible precedent. The timing of this shift raises another question. The 1840s were not a period of unusual stability. Britain was dealing with Chartist uprisings. The United States was in the middle of westward expansion. Prussia was navigating the German Confederation. These were not ideal conditions for building complex administrative systems from scratch. And yet, that's when the systems appeared. The cross-regional consistency is harder to explain. Census methods in Britain, the United States, Prussia, and France weren't identical, but they shared structural similarities. Age categories overlapped. Occupational classifications aligned. The interval between censuses standardized at 10 years. This kind of parallel development suggests either direct coordination or inheritance from a shared template. But no evidence of international coordination exists in the official record. These nations weren't collaborating on census design. They were operating independently, which leaves the question of where the template came from. The decade itself feels compressed. Between 1840 and 1850, census systems in multiple nations shifted from basic household counts to detailed individual-level data. The administrative infrastructure to support that shift appeared simultaneously. The institutional capacity materialized in parallel. It wasn't gradual. It was synchronized. And the synchronization extended beyond methodology. The decade saw the formalization of civil registration systems in Britain, the expansion of statistical bureaus across Europe, and the establishment of permanent census offices in the United States. These are not isolated reforms. They represent a coordinated expansion of state capacity. The question isn't whether this expansion happened. It clearly did. The records exist. The infrastructure is documented. The question is whether the capacity was built in the 1840s, or whether the 1840s were when existing capacity became visible. The infrastructure required to execute national censuses at this scale doesn't emerge from policy alone. It requires physical systems, offices, storage, communication networks, and those systems leave traces. In the United States, the 1840 census was managed through a network of federal marshals and their assistants. These weren't new positions created for the census. They were existing officials repurposed for data collection. But the coordination required to deploy them suggests an administrative backbone that exceeded their normal duties. The marshals operated across territories that were still being surveyed. Roads were incomplete. Settlements were scattered. Yet the census reached populations in areas where federal presence was otherwise minimal. The reach implied by that coverage feels disproportionate to the government's capacity in other domains. Britain's 1841 census introduced enumeration districts, geographic units designed specifically for data collection. The country was divided into manageable sections. Each section was assigned an enumerator. The boundaries were precise. Creating those districts required detailed knowledge of population distribution. It required maps. It required prior data. But the 1831 census hadn't collected that kind of information. So where did the district boundaries come from? The official explanation is that local officials provided the information. But the uniformity of the districts suggests a centralized design. The boundaries don't reflect local preferences. They reflect administrative logic. And that logic appeared fully formed. The United States faced a similar challenge. The 1840 census divided the country into enumeration districts that aligned with county and township boundaries. But many of those boundaries were still being formalized. Western territories were in flux. Borders were disputed. Yet the census districts were stable. They were used again in 1850 and 1860. The administrative geography of the census preceded the political geography of the nation. Prussia's 1840 census introduced household registration cards, individual forms for each household that were collected and archived. The volume of paperwork this generated is staggering. Over 6 million households, each one documented. The storage required for that volume of records is substantial. Regional archives had to be built or expanded. Cataloging systems had to be implemented. Retrieval methods had to be standardized. This kind of archival infrastructure doesn't appear in a year. It takes decades to develop. But the 1840 census functioned as if that infrastructure already existed. France's 1841 census introduced similar systems. Household forms were collected at the commune level, compiled at the department level, and sent to Paris for national aggregation. The hierarchical flow of information required coordination between local, regional, and national offices. The communication networks to support that flow had to already be in place. Letters took weeks to travel between regions. Yet the data moved smoothly. Deadlines were met. The logistical capacity implied by that coordination suggests systems that were already operational. Belgium's 1846 census went further. It collected data on housing conditions, building materials, and property ownership. This wasn't just population counting. It was a national inventory. The administrative framework to manage that level of detail requires specialized training. Enumerators had to understand construction terminology. They had to assess building quality. They had to record specific details about materials and layout. That's not something you can train in a few weeks. The consistency of the data suggests the enumerators already had that expertise. The decade also saw the expansion of statistical bureaus across Europe. Britain established the General Register Office in 1836. Belgium created the Commission Centrale de Statistique in 1841. France formalized the Statistique Générale de la France in 1840. These weren't census offices. They were permanent institutions designed to collect, analyze, and publish data continuously. The speed with which these bureaus became operational is notable. Within a year of establishment, they were producing reports. They had staff. They had budgets. They had methodologies. Institutions of that complexity don't scale quickly. They require institutional memory. They require trained personnel. They require administrative precedent. And yet, they appeared in the 1840s functioning at full capacity. The United States followed a different model but reached the same outcome. The census office wasn't made permanent until 1902, but the methods used in the 1840 census established patterns that lasted for decades. The forms were reused. The districts were maintained. The institutional knowledge persisted. That persistence suggests the 1840 framework wasn't experimental. It was established. The administrative similarity between these systems is harder to dismiss when you look at the details. Age brackets in Britain's 1841 census divided the population into 5-year intervals. The United States used similar intervals in 1850. Prussia's 1840 census grouped ages into categories that overlapped with both. These aren't intuitive divisions. They're arbitrary. And yet they align. Occupational classifications show the same pattern. Britain's 1841 census separated occupations into categories like agricultural laborers, artisans, and merchants. The United States used nearly identical categories in 1840. France's 1841 census adopted similar groupings. The alignment suggests a shared template. But the official record doesn't show where the template originated. The timing of civil registration systems compounds the pattern. Britain's 1836 Marriage Act required all marriages to be registered with the state. The 1837 Registration Act extended that requirement to births and deaths. Within 5 years, Britain had a national system for tracking vital events. That system required local registrars, regional offices, and national oversight. It required forms, protocols, and enforcement mechanisms. It appeared in the same decade as the census reforms. Belgium introduced civil registration in 1830. France had implemented it earlier in 1792, but standardized the system in the 1840s. The United States left registration to the states, but many states formalized their systems in the same period. The synchronization across nations is difficult to attribute to coincidence. The infrastructure built to support these systems is still visible. Regional archives in Britain, France, and Belgium contain records from the 1840s organized using systems that remain in use today. The cataloging methods haven't fundamentally changed. The categories are still recognizable. That continuity suggests the 1840 systems weren't prototypes. They were final versions. The over-engineering is most visible in storage. Britain's 1841 census generated over 35,000 enumeration books. Each book was bound, labeled, and archived. The storage facilities to house that volume of material had to exist before the census was conducted. Those facilities weren't built for a single census. They were built for perpetual use. The United States faced even greater challenges. The 1840 census produced records that were scattered across federal districts. But by 1850, a centralized archive existed. The records were consolidated. The system was standardized. The capacity to manage that consolidation didn't develop in a decade. It suggests planning that preceded the need. Prussia's household registration cards from 1840 were stored in regional archives designed to accommodate decades of future records. The shelving was built for expansion. The cataloging systems anticipated growth. This kind of forward planning implies long-term institutional thinking. France's 1841 census records were stored in departmental archives that had been recently expanded. The renovations included fireproofing, climate control, and security measures. These weren't temporary solutions. They were permanent investments. The question isn't whether these systems were built in the 1840s. The question is whether they were built for the 1840s. The scale of the infrastructure suggests preparation for a demand that hadn't yet materialized. And that preparation appeared across multiple nations in the same narrow window. Whether this reflects coordinated planning, inherited systems, or parallel development remains open to interpretation. The term Tartaria originates from medieval European maps. It referred to the vast territories of Central Asia, derived from Tatar, the name for Turkic and Mongol peoples. By the 19th century, the term had fallen out of official use, replaced by more specific geographic designations. In recent years, Tartaria has been reinterpreted. It's used as shorthand for questioning the continuity of 19th century institutional development. Not as a literal civilization, but as a framework for examining infrastructure that feels disproportionate to its official timeline. The census systems of the 1840s fit that framework. Three interpretation models emerge when examining this period. The first is conventional historical development. Industrial growth created demand for better data. Governments responded by building administrative capacity. The parallel timing across nations reflects shared challenges and similar solutions. The infrastructure was built quickly because the need was urgent. This model accounts for most of the evidence. It aligns with official records. It requires no additional assumptions. The second model suggests inherited systems. The administrative frameworks of the 1840s weren't built from scratch. They were adaptations of existing structures. Previous institutional capacity was repurposed or revealed. The synchronization reflects not coordination, but the activation of dormant systems. This model explains the over-engineering. It accounts for the institutional depth. It addresses why the systems appeared fully formed. The third model emphasizes convergent evolution. Nations facing similar modernization pressures developed similar solutions independently. The alignment wasn't planned. It was inevitable. Administrative logic follows patterns regardless of origin. This model explains the structural similarities without requiring direct inheritance or coordination. All three models fit the observable evidence. None can be definitively proven or dismissed. The 1840s remain notable regardless of interpretation. The decade saw administrative expansion at a scale that feels compressed. Census systems, civil registration, statistical bureaus, and archival infrastructure all materialized within the same 10-year window. That compression invites examination. Return to 1841. Britain counts 15,914,148 people in a single day. The United States documents 17 million across vast distances. Prussia records individual-level data for 30 million people. France, Belgium, and others follow similar paths. The coordination required to execute these operations simultaneously across multiple nations is substantial. Whether that coordination was explicit, inherited, or emergent remains an open question. The infrastructure built to support these systems persists. The archives still exist. The cataloging methods remain in use. The institutional frameworks established in the 1840s became the foundation for modern state administration. That continuity suggests the systems were designed for permanence, not experimentation. When we use Tartaria in this context, we're not claiming a hidden civilization. We're using it as a lens, a way to examine infrastructure that appears ahead of its documented timeline. It's metaphor, not history. A tool for asking questions about scale, timing, and administrative capacity. The evidence doesn't demand acceptance of alternative narratives. It demands attention to patterns that official timelines struggle to fully explain. The 1840s census systems represent a turning point. They marked the moment when state capacity to document populations became precise, coordinated, and permanent. Whether that capacity was built, inherited, or revealed in that decade remains ambiguous. But the infrastructure itself is unambiguous. It existed. It functioned. It scaled. And it appeared across multiple nations within the same compressed timeframe. The administrative depth required to execute national censuses at this level doesn't develop overnight. It requires training, institutional memory, and hierarchical systems. The 1840s produced all of these, either by building them rapidly or by revealing what already existed. The question isn't whether to believe one interpretation over another. The question is whether we're willing to examine infrastructure on its own terms, without assuming the official timeline fully accounts for its scale. The census systems of the 1840s invite that examination. They represent a moment when administrative capacity became visible in ways that feel disproportionate to the documented development leading up to them. The evidence exists in public archives. The records are accessible. The infrastructure is documented. What remains open is how we interpret the timing, the scale, and the synchronization. The 1840s didn't just improve census methods. They established frameworks that persist today. And those frameworks appeared, whether built, inherited, or revealed, in a decade that feels unusually dense with institutional transformation.